News. TCU adds an offensive lineman and a defensive back to their 2024 recruiting class. They also lose a wide receiver from the 2025 class. We'll talk about all that, plus Big 12 expansion, and is Gary Patterson headed back to Texas next season. All that coming up next on Locked On Horned Frogs.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
That's right, Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also find us wherever you get podcasts, and it's audio variety. I'm your host, Stephen Simcox. We are on the last day of July. August starts tomorrow. Fall camp starts this week. We're going 5 days a week now from here on out. June and July, we were kind of spotty 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but we're going Monday through Friday, full throttle as we gear up towards football season. And I had planned on talking about fall camp today, but a lot of news came down over the weekend, and we'll start on the recruiting front with TCU football as they land 2 commits for the 2024 class. It's been kind of an interesting time for recruiting. We discussed some of the guys that the staff sort of missed out on. They hit on some players, but there were some bigger targets that they were pushing pretty hard for that they didn't get. And the staff was on vacation. And so there's been sort of this period where the coaching staff and the team have been kind of rearranging which direction they're going to go now. And they landed a commit from an offensive lineman, and this moved pretty fast. So Creece Brister, who is a O-lineman from Stephenville, good program in West Texas. Of course, TCU has a coaching staff that has roots there. Joe Gillespie, former head coach at Stephenville. Kendall Briles spent some time at Stephenville as well, played high school ball there. So they know that area. And they go in there and they get Creece Brister. Brister actually came on the staff's radar at one of their mini camp events. This is one of the best things I think TCU does from a scouting or recruiting standpoint is they hold these camps. And I don't remember really who started this. I remember Michigan kind of starting the trend of this with Jim Harbaugh, and he would travel different places and put those on. But TCU does it on campus. They bring guys in. They go through drills. The staff gets to get their measurables, see how they work, see what kind of athleticism they have, and they can extend offers. And so Brister got an offer from A.J. Ricker and the staff on Thursday, and then he committed over the weekend and is now part of the 2024 class as of Sunday evening. Good size here. And we talked about this before. You cannot teach size. 6'4", 305 pounds, is currently playing tackle at Stephenville. But Brister told Jeremy Clark from Horned Frog Blitz, the 247 affiliate of TCU, I think for my height, I'm a little undersized for a tackle in college. I think that if I can start running some guard, it will really benefit me. I'm sure I'd play guard at TCU, but I would also play center if they asked me to. And so you have a guy with good size at the 4A level. They have him on the outside playing tackle, but he can move on inside. A really good frame that you can build on, 6'4", 295 pounds. And honestly, not like he's a 3-star player according to 247 Sports. Not the highest ranked guy in the world, but had a pretty good offer list. Air Force, Houston Christian, Incarnate Word, Lamar, also had a Texas Tech offer as well as Tarleton. And so we were able to get him on campus and get him pulled away from that West Texas area. Texas Tech is also a school that has been known to recruit well, that has been known to evaluate talent really well since Joe McGuire took over and kind of get in on guys early in the process and convince them to come to Tech. And it's a nice pickup. You now have 3 offensive linemen in this 2024 class. Tobias Steps, who's also a 3-star player at tackle, got Ryan Hughes, who is from the Woodlands, also played offensive tackle. And then Creece Brister, who plays tackle right now in high school, but apparently can and should be able to shift into that interior offensive line position at one of those guard spots. Sterling Brooks recently committed on the defensive side of the ball, on that defensive line spot in the interior. And then you also have Travis Jackson, the defensive end from the Tyler area. So doing a nice job in the trenches, getting guys that have good size, that I think have a high ceiling. And, we'll see what happens when Brister gets on campus. But it is nice that he's at least thinking about position flexibility, what that looks like, the ability to play center, to play guard. And they're going to have to beef up that interior line. They sort of did that in the transfer portal this past offseason by going and getting Willis Patrick from Jackson State, Colton Deary from Maryland, and then John Lands should be able to slide into one of those guard spots as well. And so now you have a guy who can develop into the project. O-line, scouting, projecting how they're going to be at the next level is always kind of tough. I talked about this John Garcia. I talked about this Brian Smith in the past. It can be hard to do, but you have a guy with good size, seems to have, a mean streak, a taste for how physical you need to be to get it done at this level. And so exciting news there. And then also TCU landed another commit from a defensive back, and this is Devondre McGee, who's from who plays at Conroe from the Houston area. McGee, also a 3-star prospect. And again, we're talking about a guy with a good size, stands at 6'1", 180 pounds. Had a really impressive offer list, including Ole Miss, SMU, and Texas A&M. And we know one thing about Joe Gillespie and corners coach Carlton Buckles. They like guys that are long, that are rangy, that have speed. And so McGee makes a lot of sense in that regard. And I think Carlton Buckles is one of the more underrated coaches on this coaching staff. Like, we haven't heard a ton about him and sort of how he interacts with players since he came over a couple off seasons ago, but he's now coached a Thorpe Award winner, and Travius Hodges-Tomlinson seemed to do a really nice job with Josh Newton last year. I'm super excited about what he can do with Avery Helm and Channing Canada and Mason White, some of the transfer corners that have made their way to TCU this offseason. So they land 2 players, a couple 3-star players, one on the offensive line, one in the defensive backfield. And so now TCU overall stands 50th in the 247 recruiting rankings. But they have 13 commits at the moment. And so they're starting to build some momentum again. You're seeing commits. And as we saw a few months ago, that can really pick things up. So good to see that the staff has kind of regrouped, gone back to the drawing board, and landed some guys that fit what they want to do on the O-line and then at that corner spot. One other note that came down, this was like late Saturday night this happened. Adrian Wilson, who, there was a weekend a few weeks ago where TCU had a really good run with 2025 players. So Ty Hawkins, the quarterback from San Antonio, he committed to TCU. And then Adrian Wilson, who's a 4-star wide receiver, he committed to TCU as well. Well, he flipped his commitment to Oregon. And so, I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about it because, not because I have sour grapes about it or anything, but just because these 2025 guys, it's hard to project where they're going to be. I think Ty Hawkins was a really good pickup. He's a quarterback. Hopefully TCU can hold on to him for the foreseeable future. But Adrian Wilson, he'll be going into his junior season this upcoming year. And so not really sure where all he's going to go. Obviously, he has a really impressive offer list and impressive number of schools and type of schools that are after him. Oregon's after him. I know Oklahoma was, really heavy in his commitment as well, or in this recruiting process as well, from Pflugerville High School. So he's getting ready for a big season. And we'll see. I think TCU will obviously stay in touch with him, and hopefully they can eventually get him in the fold. But it's one of those things where I think this is probably going to be a long recruiting process for Adrian. He's going to hear a lot of different things and go a lot of different ways, and that's fine. Everybody's approaches this differently. But now TCU down to 1 commit for that 2025 class, who is Ty Hawkins, that quarterback. Adrian Wilson, at least at the moment, committed to Oregon, and he switched that over the weekend. So there'll be a lot of twists and turns, though, between now and December of 2025. I know that's for sure. So we'll see kind of where the staff is later on down the road. When we come back, Big 12 realignment. They landed Colorado. Where will the Big 12 go next? We'll talk about that next. This is Locked On Horned Frogs. I do want to mention one of our great sponsors, though, eBay Motors. ebaymotors.com. Right parts, right fit, and the right prices. listen, with your car, you can't mess around. You have to get the right part. You have to get something that fits your vehicle. It's like making a championship team. You have to make sure every player is a perfect fit. So the next time you need parts and accessories, just head to eBay Motors. With eBay's guaranteed fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit or your money back, because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Again, right parts, right fit, and right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Motors fit only guaranteed to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. If you don't know much about cars, don't worry. Let eBay Motors fix you up. Let them do their job. Follow their instructions, and you'll make sure you get the right part. Again, that's ebaymotors.com, proud sponsor of the Locked On Network. So continuing here on Locked On Horned Frogs, I talked about this. I actually recorded this on Thursday. Episode dropped Thursday, and a lot of you saw it and listened to it on Friday. But the Big 12 has landed Colorado again. The Buffaloes and presumably Coach Prime are going to be coming over at the start of the 2024 athletic season, and that will put the Big 12 at 13 teams. It's pretty big below the Pac-12. Pac-12 now has 9 teams. Pac-12 is still desperately kind of searching and scratching and clawing, trying to find a way to get a media rights deal that can secure the future of their conference. And now, of course, the attention turns to where's the Big 12 going to go next? Because you're not going to just stop with 13 teams. That number doesn't make any sense. Brett Yormark has made it clear that he wants to expand into the Western time zone, which he's kind of done that with Colorado, even though it's more of the Mountain time zone. Brett Yormark's also made it clear that he's interested in, UConn, maybe in an all-sports capacity, maybe in a basketball-only capacity. He's interested in some of those Northeast schools, St. John's, and others, to create some sort of basketball kind of super conference, because he feels like there is untapped revenue in college basketball. And if they could be the name brand conference of college basketball, there are some different ways they could go with TV rights, maybe separate football and basketball eventually and make some more money. But the question is, which way are they going to go next? And there's been some Oregon and Washington smoke pick up too. This is going to be a crazy week. I don't know if anything's going to happen, but I know we're going to hear a lot more rumors, because now the issue is the Pac-12 is still unstable. Oregon and Washington most likely want to move on to the Big Ten if they have their choice, but the Big Ten, we don't know if they're actually interested in expanding. The SEC seems like they're good where they're at with their number. They're not super interested in expanding anymore. And so Oregon and Washington are kind of in a weird spot, because they are the bell cows of the Pac-12 now, with USC and UCLA leaving, but they don't have concrete numbers on what they can make moving forward. There's been some discussion on, do they have the leverage and the power to go to George Gleichoff and say, hey, we would like to explore unequal revenue sharing. What does that look like if we got a bigger piece of the pie than everyone else? Obviously, there would be some schools in the Pac-12 that wouldn't like that, but you also want to keep your conference together. And the Pac-12, at least publicly, which this is crazy to me, and granted, what they do publicly and what they say publicly could be vastly different and wildly different than what they are saying privately to the movers and the shakers and the negotiators. But they have come out with a statement that publicly says they are not looking to expand right now, which is insane to me, because if you're talking to a TV partner and trying to get a deal done, if I'm a TV partner, my first question would be, who's going to be in the conference? I'm not giving a deal to a 9-team conference. I need to know who's going to be here. SMU would go over there in a heartbeat. San Diego State's a little different because they have a exit fee, and they kind of put egg on their face already by telling the Mountain West, hey, we're out, and then having to come back and be like, actually, just kidding. Maybe we don't have a home there, and so we're going to have to stick it out for a little while longer. But the Big 12 is, working the phones. There's not a lot official out there, but it seems like, back channel reporting, what's going on, what you see, the rumors seem to indicate that the Big 12 is in heavy discussions with Arizona. If they could land the Wildcats, that would give them 14 teams. It would leave the Pac-12 with 8. And then the ultimate blow would be if they could somehow land Oregon and Washington and get to 16. And at that point, personally, I wouldn't be super interested in expanding anymore. I get the appeal of UConn. I get the idea of being able to possibly infiltrate the New York City market, the Northeast market. I have some skepticism. I mean, I understand New York is a melting pot. It's a huge place. There's so many people. I do have some skepticism about how much of a college sports town it is and how much they would actually care about, the Big 12 adding UConn. But I understand the logic behind it. I think if you get to 16 teams and you could somehow land Arizona and Oregon and Washington, that would be huge. I feel like it's more likely that you land one of those teams. One of those between Oregon and Washington. I feel like Arizona at this point, it seems like they're moving towards coming to the Big 12. And so if you find a way to get to 16, and one of those is, one of the big-time schools from the Pacific Northwest, then you have to feel good about the future of the Big 12 Conference. They would be located in just about every time zone, located across the country, East Coast to West Coast, and some good programs too. And so we'll see what happens here. But I know that Brett Yormark, he's discussed this before. He is a self-proclaimed positive disruptor. He's going to disrupt things. He's going to be aggressive. He is a salesman at heart. I mentioned this, but at Big 12 Media Days, he said this. He was like, I am not a huge college football guy. He's brand new to the college football business, the college athletics world. But he knows how to sell things. He knows how to think aggressively. He knows how to be one step ahead and see the future. That presentation that he gave at Big 12 Media Days before the coaches started talking, it was a little cheesy at times. It was very new tech. I said this on Twitter at the time. I was like, it felt like a presentation about the new iPhone, but it fit with what the brand and the culture that he's trying to, build around the Big 12, which is a cutting-edge league that understands innovation, that is turning over every rock to try to find revenue, and is on the warpath to stay relevant, and probably not going to reach the heights of the SEC and the Big Ten, but at least wants to be in the same zip code from a revenue sharing standpoint of those two conferences. So prepare for a lot of news this week. Now, Jason Shear, who covers Arizona for Wildcat Authority, which is part of the 247 network, he mentioned today, he was like, listen, I know there's a lot of smoke around this right now, but these things take time. There's a lot of issues you have to work out. There's, a ton of different sports, scheduling, negotiating buyouts, all those things. So he's basically kind of saying, hey, don't expect anything this week, which he's closer to the situation than I am. But it feels like Brett Yormark and the movers and shakers of college football want to get this wrapped up before the season starts. I mean, that would make the most sense. If there's a way to get everybody squared away, before the year starts and get the movement done, then you have a pretty clear picture of, okay, in 2024, this is what I'm looking forward to moving through the new landscape of college football. When we come back, will TCU have to face Gary Patterson again this season? We'll talk about it next on Locked On Horned Frogs. So as many of you know, last year after getting dismissed, or TCU and Gary Patterson kind of parted ways in the middle of the season, Gary wasn't done coaching. He wanted to be back out there. He wanted to be part of the game. And so he was an analyst, a defensive analyst at Texas with Steve Sarkisian, and spent the last season there, did some nice things with that defense, was part of that coaching staff. And he left at the end of the year. And those analyst jobs are always interesting because there's not like these set contracts. Obviously Gary got paid handsomely. I think he got paid like $1 million for his work last season, but it's a little more open-ended than your typical assistant coach contract. or your head coach contract. And there's support positions. So he left at the end of the season, went and did his thing this offseason. And I just assumed that his time there was done. And then Chip Brown from the 247 affiliate of Texas, he reports on Saturday night. He says, hey, Gary Patterson's coming back to Texas for another season. I retweeted that, and then that story went away, and they kind of backpedaled, and they basically said, well, Steve Sarkisian has extended the invitation to Gary Patterson and essentially said, hey, if you'd like to do this, it's open for you. This job is here for you if you want to be a part of this coaching staff again. And that was intriguing to me. I think there's a couple things that went off in my brain when I saw that. The first was it was always sort of a juggling act to see how much credit Gary got for the advances that TCU defense had the Texas defense had last year, excuse me. Because nobody really knew exactly what his position was or what he was doing on a day-to-day basis. And so I just remember, and I talked to Jonathan Davis about this, who hosts Locked on Longhorns. I remember after the Alabama game, there was a ton of praise for Gary. And people that watched that game that kind of focused more on scheme were like, Texas played a lot of quarter coverage that night. They had some different exotic blitz packages. They really took a lot of risk and pressured Alabama into some unexpected things. And that felt like a Gary Patterson game plan. That was kind of, the narrative that came out of that game. The TCU game obviously was just a slugfest, right? The defensive struggle. And, yeah, I'm sure Gary had a huge impact and was really valuable that week scouting TCU, like understanding his players, his former players, understanding what their strengths and weaknesses were, and building a game plan that worked against the Frogs. And Texas played really well that night on defense. They lost that game 17-10, but their one touchdown was a defensive touchdown, like crazy. Max fumbled the exchange and then tried to jump on the ball, and the ball got loose, and they picked it up, and it was a scoop and score situation. But they played great defense all night, and I have no doubt Gary is part of that. At the same time, he spent most of his summer out and about doing his own thing, and now they're like, hey, if you want to come back, you can. So it wasn't a job where he was required to be there for spring ball, because he wasn't. He wasn't there during the offseason, which, it's not like he's recruiting. It's his prerogative to take as much time as he wants. I just mean to say, from a impact question, or if we're thinking about like what Gary is doing with the defense on a day-to-day basis, I'm sure he's having some impact, but I can't imagine that he is super involved in the game planning week to week if he's not there during the offseason. But maybe I'm wrong about that. I do think this part of the story, though, is kind of fascinating. And I don't have insight here. I don't know if Gary has been offered things and he's just turned it down. But I am surprised that he hasn't landed at a smaller school yet as a head coach or a DC. Because I just always thought, and it's hard to tell with Gary because he's so intense, and in some ways you think he has that personality of the guy that's just going to have to be dragged off the field. But at the same time, he got his music hobby, right? He does a lot of work in the community, does a lot of good for the Fort Worth community. He's got things that sort of keep him busy outside of football. And I feel like in his later years at TCU, we sort of saw a different side of him, that maybe he's not just this totally football-obsessed person. But Jerry Kill is at New Mexico State, and I just wondered, like, would that be the type of job that Gary would take next? His name got floated around a little bit by like fans when the Northwestern position came open. That would not have made any sense to me, because Northwestern reeling from the Pat Fitzgerald scandal, I don't think they would have went after Gary. I mean, great football coach, but like from a PR perspective, needing somebody to get out in front of the media all the time and have a good relationship with them and sort of probably be more of a player's coach that is not encouraging a culture of, kind of hard-nosed discipline. That's not the Gary Patterson way. So I'm not surprised they didn't really show interest there. But I am kind of shocked that he hasn't ended up somewhere as a DC or a head coach. But this analyst position seems like a good gig. I mean, if he's truly sort of rolling in, when he wants during the offseason and has that ability to do his own thing and still be really active in his different ventures and come on when fall camp starts and be a part of this, then that's a gift that doesn't really happen anywhere, but especially not in the coaching world. So we'll see how this plays out. I just thought it was intriguing. Gary Patterson, apparently, the invitation has been extended to him that he can come to Texas if he would like this year and be back for this next football season as part of the Longhorns coaching staff. That'll do it for Locked On Horned Frogs today. We'll be back tomorrow. It's your team every day.